Scotland during Saturday evening. And then a more concerted breakdown in the weather during Sunday, Monday and Tuesday. Hot at first, but an increased risk of some very heavy thunderstorms.
Join us for our exclusive interview with Jacob Rees-Mogg.
We'll be speaking to him about religion, about his family, the downfall of Boris and why he supported Liz Truss in the leadership election.
10 till 12 this Saturday on GBNews, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. We've got a jam-packed show for you today covering all the stories that matter to you at home. Coming up this hour, there are widespread drought warnings across the south of England today, with warnings that the conditions could last until October. We'll be getting the very latest on this throughout today's show. And the UK economy shrunk by 0.1% in the last quarter as recession warnings loom. We'll be getting the very latest from economist Julian Jessup. And as the race for number 10 reaches its critical stage, we'll speak to a former advisor to David Cameron, Philip Blond, on what we can expect next in this contest. And through it all, give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 12. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. A drought is expected to be declared in many parts of England following a meeting by the government's National Drought Group. Months of dry weather sees millions of people facing hosepipe bans, with Yorkshire Water becoming the latest firm to announce one from the 26th. A 4-day amber warning for extreme heat from the Met Office is currently in place for parts of England and Wales. Speaking to us earlier, meteorologist John Hammond said we must be careful about our water usage.
I think it's just a wise move for us to sort of restrict our water usage to some extent now, because big problems could lie ahead, as I say, if we carry on with this dry theme. And although it's going to be wetter next week, and yes, you'll think it's kind of back to normal because the temperatures will fall by 10 or 15 degrees, that is really papering over the cracks of what is a much bigger issue beneath the ground, where groundwater levels will continue to fall unless we have sustained wet weather.
And we can, in fact, confirm that the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs have said that parts of the southwest, parts of southern and central England and the east of England are to be moved into drought status. And we'll bring you more on that as we get it. Boris Johnson has insisted there will be further cost of living support for struggling households. It comes as a new price cap prediction claims the average family's annual energy bill could reach £5,300 by April next year. The forecast by energy consultancy firm Auxilian is £240 higher than the one it gave yesterday. It reflects the rapidly rising gas and electricity prices. Speaking on a visit to North Wales, the Prime Minister said the government was taking short and long-term measures to combat the energy crisis.
The cash is not only coming through now and has started to come through, but will continue to come through over the weeks and months ahead.
But the people saying it's not enough. It's not enough.
And in addition, what we are doing is making sure that we have the fiscal firepower, we have the cash to help people more at those two key points, in October and in January.
The UK economy shrank by 0.1% between April and June. That's according to official figures. The Office for National Statistics says the phasing out of COVID-19 spending is partly to blame. The big fall of economic growth in June, it says, was partly caused by the extra bank holiday to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Well, Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi says he's looking at additional ways to help vulnerable households.
My task was to make sure we get the 37 billion out into people's pockets. We're midway through that, so in the next couple of months, people will see their bills reduced by £400. The most vulnerable, 8 million, will get £324. So my message to the viewers is we're looking at all the options of what additional help we need to bring in later on in the winter months, in December and January. Work those up so they're ready to go from the 5th of September when the Prime Minister walks into number 10.
Well, meanwhile, Rishi Sunak has claimed he's ready to find £10 billion worth of support for those struggling with the cost of living this autumn. The former Chancellor's argued for direct payments to the most vulnerable, such as pensioners. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, meanwhile, stood by her economic policy at the Cheltenham Conservative hustings last night, saying her priority was still to cut taxes. Tributes are being held in the city of Plymouth today, marking 1 year since 5 people were killed by a gunman in Kiev. A civic ceremony has taken place at the Minster Church of St Andrew and a community vigil will take place later. Jake Davison killed his mother following a row and then shot 4 others. After the attack, he turned his weapon on himself. In other news, the FBI was looking for classified nuclear documents during the raid of Donald Trump's Florida home on Monday. That's according to local media. It comes just hours after the US Department of Justice made a request to a Florida court to unseal the search warrant. The unveiling's been welcomed by the former US president. Trump's calling the search a political attack. The raid was part of an investigation into his handling of official presidential documents. Russia and Ukraine are blaming each other for the shelling of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Reports suggest it was struck 5 times yesterday, with shelling coming close to facilities storing radioactive material. The UN's calling for the plant to become a demilitarized zone. The family of US actress Heche has announced they don't expect her to survive after a car crash earlier this week. A warning the following contains flashing images. The 53-year-old suffered severe brain injuries in the crash and has been in a coma ever since. The actress is known for films such as Donnie Brasco and the 1998 Psycho remake. And the shortlist of potential host cities for Eurovision 2023 has been released. 7 are on it: Birmingham, Glasgow, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle and Sheffield. The UK was chosen to host the contest after organisers decided it couldn't be staged by last year's winners, Ukraine. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, let's return to Tom with the briefing.
Welcome to the programme. Well, in the last hour, the Prime Minister has resurfaced after his 2-week holiday. He's got a little bit blonder as well. He was grilled by reporters in Wales on what he is doing to tackle the cost of living crisis. Well, here's what the Prime Minister had to say when he was quizzed on what he was doing to help families across the country.
I think it's crucial to understand that, first of all, we realised for a long time that things were going to be tough, and that's why we put in place a lot of measures already. The money has started to come through. I think it's very important for people to understand most people have not yet received the help that the government has already allocated. So over the course of the next couple of months, you're going to see about 8 million households get another £326. You're going to see everybody in October get help with the energy support scheme, and that was £400 for. I just think it's important to address. I think people haven't seen the money come in, and it is coming.
Yeah, okay.
Let me just finish. Another £400 to help everybody, plus £150 to help the 1 in 10 who are disabled. They haven't seen that yet. It is coming in, but there are two key pinch points, and there are other funds coming in. £300 to help pensioners in.
But are you going to tell the choice is eat or eat for millions of people?
The winter fuel payments. So there are two pinch points ahead, and they are in October and in the new year, in December, January. And so I'm describing the cash that's already coming through, and there's already.
Do you think it's enough?
No, because what I'm saying is what we're doing in addition is trying to make sure that by October, by January, there is further support. And what the government will be doing, whoever is the Prime Minister, is making sure there is extra cash to help people.
Is it too late to be waiting for the new people? Because
no,
you get the two contenders in a room with you refereeing to act now, because people are watching this. They want the Conservative government to do something because the straits are desperate for people. They're worried.
Explaining that the cash is not only coming through now and has started to come through, but will continue to come through over the weeks and months ahead.
But there are people saying it's not enough. It's not enough.
And in addition, what we are doing is making sure that we have the fiscal firepower, we have the cash to help people more at those two key points, in October and in January. So whoever it is, whether it's a man or a woman, you're going to find that the new leader, the new Prime Minister.
But people want something right now.
They want it right now. Yes, I know. I don't think, with great respect, you've been listening, because the cash is not only coming in right now, but more is already due to come through. What we're talking about is extra cash for October and then for January. But what you've fundamentally got to do is make sure that you do some things to fix the energy markets, and that's what we were doing yesterday. To make sure.
What did you get from what did you get from that?
Well, you have to wait and see. But I'm encouraged by some of the things that we're seeing from energy companies about more they can do to help consumers with staggering the payments, with making sure that. Some of the renewable companies and the nuclear companies, for instance, are making quite a lot of money at the moment. They could do more, we think, to help their customers. The other thing you need to do is make sure that we undo the mistakes of the past and have not just go for hydrocarbons, our own hydrocarbons in the North Sea. And again, we gave clear commitments to those companies. They need to get on and.
But do you really understand how people feel? Because people haven't got any money.
And then what you also need to do is ensure that you undo the tragic mistakes of the past and have nuclear capacity. And what this government is doing is now green-lighting nuclear energy, when for the whole of the period of the Labour government, not a single nuclear power plant was started or commissioned. So we are doing stuff in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term. And if you ask, what we're doing, here, let me just tell you, what we've done, thanks to the decisions that this government took, we have a robust economic situation in which actually we have virtually record low unemployment. Here at Broughton in North Wales, you've got an amazing company employs about 5,000 people. Do you know, they've come out of this pandemic in a position where they are actually able to increase their output of wings by 50% in the next couple of years.
Hang on,
I'm going to make the final point, which is going to drive jobs and growth for the future. And that will enable us, that will put us in a strong position to continue to do what we've done throughout the pandemic and beyond, which is to find the cash to help people in the way that this government has done. Let me repeat, we're putting 37 billion in now. That money will continue to arrive in the course of the weeks and months ahead. There will be more announcements in September, and those will address the key pinch points in October and in January.
Well, the Prime Minister speaking there. Nice to be reminded we do have a Prime Minister, even though this leadership contest seems to be dragging out quite a long time and indeed squeezing out most of the other news. Well, this morning, the Office for National Statistics has announced that the UK economy has shrunk by 0.1% in the second quarter of this year. However, the country is not in a recession, of course, due to GDP growing by 0.8% in the first quarter. And as we all know, it's 2 quarters of consecutive negative growth that would mean a recession has taken place. Well, the Bank of England now predicts that the UK will enter recession in the last 3 months of this year and throughout 2023. 5 consecutive quarters is their prediction. Let's bring in the economist Julian Jessup to make sense of what's going on, because there is one element where the forecasters were wrong today. They were predicting a deeper track back. They were predicting even less growth, more negative growth, however you want to phrase it, than the 0.1 we have today. Is that some cause for optimism?
Well, I suppose so at the margin. I mean, the news today was that the fall in economic activity in June was not as big as some people had feared. It's only about half as big as some people had factored in. So the news today is actually mildly reassuring. You know, the private sector economy seems to be holding up reasonably well, given all the pressures on the economy at the moment from the cost of living crisis. But I think regardless of exactly what the official data tell you, it clearly is going to feel like a recession for many ordinary households who are struggling to pay their heating bills and their energy bills. And the fact also that...
I'll just interrupt you there, because we're showing now a graphic of the real GDP growth across the United Kingdom, the US, Germany and France. A graphic that you have produced showing the comparison between these nations. What does this tell you?
Well, the first point to make is that the UK is not an outlier. I mean, a lot of people obviously will attribute the weak growth or the fall in GDP in the second quarter to Brexit or blame the Tories. But actually, there are plenty of other countries, this 3 here, the US, Germany and France, have all seen at least 1 quarter of flat or negative growth so far this year. So it's very much the reflection of a global crisis. But I think the UK is different in at least one respect, which is that we're the only major economy actually planning to raise taxes over the next year, in particular the big increase in corporation tax. You mentioned also the Bank of England's forecasts, which are relatively gloomy. They're more gloomy than most people's for the UK economy. But the key point there is that they're based on the assumption of unchanged government policy. So they're assuming no additional support with the cost of living, no new tax cuts, and the government presses ahead with the planned increases in corporation tax. So if we do get a new Prime Minister who's willing to change tack on fiscal policy, I think there's still a good chance that we avoid the technical definition of a recession that you described.
Really, even this late stage in the game, if a new Prime Minister comes in, when a new Prime Minister comes in on the 6th of September, in your view, there would be time to avert this sort of prediction of real recession?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, first of all, I expect growth to return to positive territory in the third quarter. So if there is going to be a recession starting in the fourth quarter, it has to mean that GDP falls in the first quarter of next year as well. So we've got time to avoid that technical definition of recession. But I'd also stress how important expectations and confidence are. At the moment, people are understandably not very confident about the economic outlook and personal finances in particular. But if we get a new prime minister who's willing to be a lot bolder, then that sentiment could change pretty quickly. In the meantime, business confidence actually is holding up reasonably well. I mean, consumers are obviously worried about their bills, but businesses are reasonably happy, and actually business investment in the second quarter was quite strong. Our exports rebounded as well. So there are some signs of hope in the economy. But the absolutely key thing here, I think, is clearly going to be consumers. They are benefiting from the fact that the labour market is still very strong. So even the Bank of England isn't expecting a big increase in unemployment, but they still need a bit more help with their bills, and whether that's done through a combination of cost of living support, transfer payments, or tax cuts. I think the next prime minister, whoever he or she may be, needs to do more, and almost certainly will.
I wonder, though, talking about this idea of avoiding a recession, is it not in the minds of some people, potentially even in the minds of the Bank of England, that a recession is necessary to curtail this inflationary spiral that we seem to be in? That the idea that part of the reason behind raising interest rates may be to instigate a bit of a recession, and that might stop these prices rising. Is that a legitimate point of view?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of people do think that, including the Bank of England. The Bank of England seems to think that the only way that monetary policy works is by raising interest rates to weaken the real economy, and then therefore reduce inflation that way. But I think that's quite a narrow view. There's a lot of groupthink in there. I think ultimately the level of inflation is primarily about monetary policy. It's about the amount of money in the economy, and also people's expectations for inflation in particular. So there's a lot that monetary policy can do here to restore credibility, to get inflation expectations down, without that necessarily relying on dragging the economy into recession. I talked about global inflation, but actually there are plenty of countries, China, Japan, even Switzerland in Europe, who have avoided a big surge in inflation. And that's partly because their monetary policy is more credible than the one we've had here or in the rest of Europe or in the US.
That's really interesting. So we can have a tighter monetary policy without that necessitating a recession, potentially a tighter monetary policy and a looser fiscal policy in the form of tax cuts or some handouts. And that could be the way to sort of steer ourselves through this crisis.
I think that's definitely right. I mean, almost all economists would agree that fiscal policy is currently too tight and monetary policy is too loose. We might argue about how fiscal policy should be loosened. I mean, some people think it should be done more on the benefit side than the tax side, or they'd like to see more public spending. But I think we have got the mix wrong here. So looser fiscal policy could actually help by boosting the economy, but also making it more credible for the Bank of England to continue raising interest rates, because fiscal policy will protect the economy from that. So I think we've got the mix wrong. There's a lot of groupthink here, and maybe a new Prime Minister is the opportunity to rethink all of that.
Well, really, really interesting. I suppose we do not have that long to wait, although it does seem like this leadership contest is dragging on longer than just about anything else we've experienced before. But yes, the start of September will be a very interesting time. For now, Julian Jessup, thank you very much for joining us on The Briefing this afternoon. Really appreciate your time. Now, coming up next, we'll be speaking about that Conservative leadership debate as it continues to drag on. But before that, let's have a look at the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Hot and sunny once again for the vast majority, with 35 Celsius possible in places today and tomorrow. A couple of exceptions, it will stay much cooler for the far north of Scotland with cloud, some outbreaks of rain here, although not a great deal, and some mistiness around northeastern coasts, so eastern Scotland and northeast England will see some mist and low cloud, not everywhere, but certainly a signal for some of that to linger around these coasts, keeping things much cooler here as well. But elsewhere it's sunny and it is very hot. Temperatures widely reaching 30 to 33 Celsius, and in the south 34 or 35 Celsius are possible. The hot spot, I think, somewhere around the Midlands into the West Country and London. Into the evening, and there will be some outbreaks of rain close to the Northern Isles as well as the Outer Hebrides, but this will generally be light and patchy, and around these North Sea coasts once again mist, low cloud, fog creeps in, but elsewhere clear spells and a very warm night to come with temperatures in places staying up in the mid to high teens. The start of Saturday brings some mist around these North Sea coasts, and generally it will retreat back to the beaches, with most places inland seeing sunny skies. Some rain for a time for Shetland, but otherwise, although it will stay cloudy and cool in the north, most places are dry, and temperatures once again reaching 35 Celsius in places. Enough to spark a shower or two for the North Pennines, for the southern uplands, for example. Where these occur, and they will be very isolated, they're likely to bring some very heavy rainfall, drifting north into central Scotland during Saturday evening. And then a more concerted breakdown in the weather during Sunday, Monday and Tuesday. Hot at first, but an increased risk of some very heavy thunderstorms.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, the Tory leadership frontrunner Liz Truss last night was accused by rival Rishi Sunak of putting vulnerable people at real risk of destitution after she indicated she'll put tax cuts and fracking above support payments for families facing unaffordable fuel bills. Well, at a hustings last night in Cheltenham, the pair clashed on how to deal with the cost of living crisis as bills skyrocket for millions of families across the country. Let's discuss this now with a former advisor to David Cameron, Philip Blond. And Philip, I'm wondering in this discussion, when it comes to the things that these candidates say, and then the things that these candidates say the opposition candidates said, sometimes they don't quite line up. Sometimes these words are wrenched from context or over-interpreted. Do you think there's been a bit of skullduggery with some of these press releases? Rishi Sunak saying that Liz Truss has been saying she won't provide any fiscal support for those who don't pay tax, and on the other side, Liz Truss saying that Rishi Sunak's never cut a tax in his life. Has it all got a bit pretend?
I think sort of what strikes me most about the leadership contest is how none of the leadership candidates are addressing the major structural issues that face the country. I mean, it is true that with average fuel bills approaching something like £5,000 of post-tax income, that would mean destitution for those on the lowest wages. How could it not? It's also true that neither what Rishi proposes or what Liz proposes would in any way be equal to that. So I think that there's truth in the sort of hyperbolic takes they have of each other, but neither of the leadership candidates are particularly strong on addressing any of the real long-term issues that face the country. It's kind of like fake press releases to a very, very narrow corner of the electorate, which is the Tory party membership. And none of this will come into play when either candidate wins to govern the country. And all of it is way, way, way kind of out in kind of mad world when compared to kind of what the electorate wants. So I think that's really where we are, just in kind of ideological fantasy world, really, not engaging with the reality that the country faces.
Now, both of these candidates do say that there will be more to say when they actually get into the job. We've had supporters of Liz Truss, for example, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Simon Clarke, saying that he is drawing up lots of different plans and that whoever gets in will be able to go on these plans from day one. I suppose, in your view, Philip Blond, is it the case that what's being said now might not be all that similar to what happens in the first couple of weeks of September, when whoever wins, they'll probably put forward quite a lot more help?
Yeah, look, I mean, not everything that's been said, I think, will vanish like dew on a hot summer's morning in England. All of it is inadequate. All of it is ill thought through. All of it won't stand the first contact with reality. The reality is people are going to need something far more substantial than a couple of £100 off their bills that Sunak's promising by removing VAT on people's kind of energy costs. It's going to need something hugely substantive. And that, of course, will happen, I think, within the first week of either assuming power, because what we're dealing with now is the candidate's impression of their electorate, who are highly ideological, who largely are quite old, are formed in the 1980s, and whose policy mix is Mrs. Thatcher's homework, and it's in no way applicable to the needs of the country today. But that is where we are. So we'll have a radically different kind of policy mix. And the Conservative Party has been pretty bad at dealing with the issues facing the country. Almost from 2010, we've had no substantive, at-scale, successful policy making within the Conservative Party that has succeeded. We haven't really, since the great financial crash, tackled any of the long-term problems facing this country. Even levelling up is a little bit no more than very small amounts of money to do at people's high streets. It's really insubstantial. And we're falling so far behind in reference to what we really need to do. And there isn't really any evidence that there's sufficient intellect, policy awareness, or ability in the government to tackle the problems that the country faces.
Well, this starts to sound like a bit of Liz Truss's pitch that business as usual is not an option, that she wants to change all of these orthodoxies that have been running things for a while. I wonder if this particular crisis of energy has really crystallised this debate, has fed into the polls as we're seeing them, with Liz Truss surging ahead. The idea that Rishi Sunak today has admitted that he would borrow more in order to deal with this crisis, sort of undoing the entire pitch of his leadership campaign from the off, which was, we've got to keep fiscal policy tight and we've got to get rid of inflation before we spend any more or cut any more taxes. He seems to have completely turned about course on that, perhaps flailing a little as events have unfolded.
I think that's right. I think that he was always... I think the trouble with Sunak is he didn't really ever have a broad vision of the British economy. It's not clear he really understood the issues that are at play. it's clear he opposed levelling up. So I've always felt he was particularly narrow. I think you're right that the part of the attraction of Liz Truss is the idea that, you know, the status quo won't hold. But part of the worry about Liz Truss is she's going back to the 1980s for her policy mix. Even her remarks on profits, cause one to step back a bit. I mean, there are profits that are so high and so inordinate, they're called rent. And any proper free market party wants to eliminate sort of rental profits that come from monopoly positions within the energy sector. So you reap undue profits, which is a huge cost to all other businesses. And we've, for well over a decade, the Conservative Party has in effect licensed the monopolisation of the British economy, which is why we haven't really had a free market competition policy.
Certainly. I don't think there is a housing market at all in this country, and what there's been is an incredibly low interest rate and zero building environment, which has probably been the state interference that has made it quite so difficult for so many people. I'm afraid we've got to head to the news now, but Philip Blond, thank you so much for talking through those issues there. Really, really fascinating stuff. Now, coming up, is Labour finally winning over the trust of the public? Well, polling firm Ipsos Mori have commissioned a poll that suggests that might just be true. We'll be discussing that in depth after your news update.
It's 12:34. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. A drought has been declared in parts of southern, central, east and southwest England. It means yet more water companies may begin announcing stricter measures to conserve supplies. It follows months of dry weather and comes as Yorkshire Water becomes the latest to impose a hosepipe ban. The UK economy shrank by 0.1% between April and June, according to official figures. That compares to the first 3 months of the year when GDP grew. The Office for National Statistics says the phasing out of COVID-19 spending is partly to blame, as well as the extra bank holiday to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Boris Johnson's insisted there'll be further support for struggling households during the cost of living crisis. Speaking on a visit to North Wales, the Prime Minister assured the public his successor would provide sufficient support. Well, one of those, Rishi Sunak, has claimed that he's ready to find £10 billion worth of support for those struggling with the cost of living this autumn. The former Chancellor's argued for direct payments to the most vulnerable, such as pensioners. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, meanwhile, stood by her economic policy at last night's Cheltenham Conservative hustings, saying her priority is still to cut taxes. The FBI was looking for classified nuclear documents during the raid of Donald Trump's Florida home on Monday. That's according to local media. It comes just hours after the US Department of Justice had asked a federal judge in Florida to unseal the search warrant. The raid was part of an investigation into his handling of official presidential documents. And the shortlist of potential UK host cities for Eurovision 2023 has been released. 7 are on it: Birmingham, Glasgow, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle and Sheffield. The UK was chosen to host the contest after organisers decided it couldn't be staged by last year's winners, Ukraine. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. It's back to Tom with the briefing in just a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Now, a drought has been declared for parts of England as the driest summer for 50 years continues. Parts of the southwest, southern and central England, as well as the east of England, are affected. Our national reporter Paul Hawkins is in Somerset and sent this report.
Here at Wimbleball Lake in Somerset in the southwest, you can see with your own eyes just how much this drought, this lack of rainfall over the past few months, certainly over July, the driest July in England since 1935, the effect it has had on the level of water, which has receded significantly, leaving behind very dry, very parched, very arid landscape. This lake is used for recreational activities, but frankly that's not the top concern at the moment. The top concern is how South West Water, indeed the water companies across England, are going to supply water to the general public and also to the many businesses and farmers, agriculture that rely on the water, because the ground here is so dry, so parched and arid. It's not just a problem for farmers who are trying to plant crops, who are trying to get crops out of the ground. The fact is, obviously that's not good for the seedlings and for the plants themselves, but the ground is so hard that it is difficult for the farmers to get their equipment into the soil, and it's frankly, it's ruining the machinery, it's ruining parts of the machinery, making it very difficult to get their equipment into the ground to pull the plants out, which themselves are suffering because of a lack of rain. Now, how to change the situation? Well, the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology says we're going to need significant amounts of rainfall. In fact, exceptional rainfall for 1 month up to 3 months, really, if the situation is going to correct itself, if the levels of underground water and in the rivers and in the reservoirs are going to restore themselves. There are some scattered thunderstorms forecast for next week, but short, sharp, scattered, intense bursts of rain are no good. Falling on the hard ground, they just run off straight into the rivers and straight out to sea. They don't hang around in the soil long enough to replenish the reservoirs and the underground stores of water. So what we need is light rain over a long period, over large parts of England, for at least a couple of months. That's what the experts are saying, if this situation is going to correct itself. And then, of course, there's the problem with leaks as well within the water system. 25% of the problem comes from leaks in pipes, underground pipes, which actually is a better situation than it was many years ago. But still, a lot of experts are saying that the water companies need to get better at plugging leaks, and we as consumers need to become more efficient with our water use if we're going to conserve water in the future, and certainly if we're going to have to go through this again next summer, if this autumn and this winter are as dry as the last one.
Really concerning stuff there from Paul Hawkins. I just want to bring your attention to a tweet by the Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament, Layla Moran. Back in March of this year, she tweeted, "I have secured a debate in Parliament on the proposed Abingdon Reservoir next Wednesday. I'm looking forward to putting the concerns and questions of local residents to the government and making sure we receive proper assurances and answers linking to a Westminster Hall debate there." It's really heartening to know that our politicians over the last year have spent their hours busily stopping the construction of new reservoirs. this country? Well, new polling suggests that the public have more faith in Labour than the Tories in a series of key areas of policy in other news. So irrespective of who wins the Tory leadership contest, could the Labour Party be doing a little bit better? Conducted by the pollster Ipsos, the findings suggest that attitudes towards Labour under Sir Keir Starmer are slightly improving. Labour has a massive lead over the Tory government, a hypothetical Tory government led by Liz Truss, in 12 separate areas. Starmer has a 13-point lead, according to this survey, over Truss on improving public services, a 12-point lead on reducing waiting times in the NHS, and a 9-point lead on growing the economy. Meanwhile, Truss leads Starmer on who is most likely to cut taxes. Well, let's bring in Kieran Pedley, the Director of Politics at Ipsos Mori, the pollsters. And first of all, Kieran, I suppose, how reasonable is it to compare a hypothetical leader of a party to a real leader of a party? What can exercises like this tell us before someone's even got the job?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that what the question does here is it compares two hypotheticals. It compares a hypothetical Conservative government led by Liz Truss versus a hypothetical Labour government led by Keir Starmer. So, in truth, neither of them are actual realities, and I completely recognise that obviously this is hypothetical. But what it does give you is a sense of where the public mood is at the moment, at least instinctively, when it comes to the potential replacement for Boris Johnson. And we should remember it isn't definitely Liz Truss, but she is the front runner. But also what a Labour government under Keir Starmer would look like too. I think what we see is this kind of almost latent residual assumption that in some of the key areas that the public care most about at the moment, namely cost of living and public services and things of that nature, then there is an assumption that Labour would do a better job. Now, of course, that can be turned around if an incoming Truss or Sunak administration does do a good job on those things. But it shows, I guess, the inheritance that the new Prime Minister will have, which is going to be a challenging one in terms of turning the Conservative Party's current political fortunes with the public around.
Interesting to note this question of tax, the one area in which Liz Truss seems to appear to lead this hypothetical Labour government. That seems to be a bit of a change from where the Conservative Party was. I remember reporting a few months ago that the Labour Party had overtaken the Conservative parties for the reputation on low taxes, something that really concerned a lot of Conservative MPs. Does it look like the Conservatives in this area, if not anywhere else, are clawing back some credibility?
So what we find is that people think it's 43% of the public think a hypothetical Truss administration would be likely to reduce taxes, and 38% say the same about a hypothetical Starmer administration. So it isn't a huge difference, but you're quite right to say that Liz Truss leads on this measure in a way that Rishi Sunak, for example, doesn't over Keir Starmer. So that will obviously be welcome for the Conservatives. I guess at the same time, what will matter is whether that's delivered upon in office, if it is to be Liz Truss, what impact that tangibly has on people's wallets and how they feel about their economic situation. And then, of course, what that means for the economy long term. I note that Rishi Sunak's campaign has criticised the idea of reducing taxes at this stage and said that would be bad for the economy. So, of course, if that does turn out to be true, and I'm not going to pass judgment myself on that, but if it does, then any honeymoon period that Liz Truss might have for reducing taxes would be short-lived.
So to some extent, really, the delivery matters more than the promises in a lot of these areas. I wonder, looking at all of these individual issues, how does this add up in terms of the overall picture of attractability of these parties? Because I remember back to 2019 when Jeremy Corbyn was proposing all of these individual policies that individually might poll well, but the package as a whole was seen as not credible and the party as a whole wasn't believed on it. Is there any relationship like that between these areas? I know they're not specific policies, but these areas and the party as a whole?
I think that's right, and I think that this is probably partly the concern that Keir Starmer has, which sort of drives, shall we say, a perceived caution in Labour's policy announcements. There are two numbers I draw your attention to. The first is that net satisfaction of Keir Starmer as Labour leader currently sits at -20. Ed Miliband went into the 2015 election on -19, so he's getting Miliband-esque numbers in his own personal poll ratings. And when we ask about the Labour Party specifically, 37% of the public think the Labour Party is ready for government and 43% disagree. Now, that level of disagreement has fallen quite sharply from the days of Corbyn and Miliband, when a clear majority, or as many as 6 in 10, disagreed Labour was ready for office. But that 37% that agree is stubbornly sort of below that 40% mark, and not that much better than Miliband and Corbyn sort of achieved. So when you put all those numbers together, I think what you find is that on certain policy areas, Labour does enjoy an advantage over the Conservatives. That's very clear in the data. But the overall package of the Labour Party and government, is a deal that is yet to be sealed with the general public. So what the Labour Party will be looking to do, I imagine, in the next coming months, when the new Prime Minister is in place, is to try and change that and to convince the public that they are indeed ready to take office in the next couple of years.
Moving forward in some areas, but still a way to go. I suppose that's to be expected after the scale of defeat that the party suffered in 2019. It'll be an interesting one to watch. Of course, potentially 2 years, potentially even 2.5 years, the latest that this Parliament could possibly run to. But for now, Kieran Pedley, Director of Politics at Ipsos Mori, thank you so much for talking through those really, really interesting findings there from that survey. Well, now a memorial service will take place in Plymouth this morning to mark the 1-year anniversary of the Heche tragedy. 5 people were shot dead on August the 12th last year as they went about their daily lives. After the 12-minute attack, the gunman then turned his weapon on himself. 1 year on, the devastated community is still waiting for answers as to what happened that day and why. Our South of England reporter Jeff Moody sent us this report.
It's been a year, but the people here still trying to make sense of the senseless. In the aftermath of the attack, exactly a year ago, shock, anger, and a coming together in grief. Today, that grief less raw, but just as real.
The community has come together in Heche quite well. They're working together. There's quite a lot happening in terms of supporting each other, as well as other organisations within the Heche community supporting people.
On the 12th of August last year, 22-year-old Jake Davison opened fire at a house on Biddick Drive, killing his mother, Maxine. He then went onto the street and shot dead Lee Martin and his 3-year-old daughter, Sophie. Next, he injured a 53-year-old woman and her 33-year-old son in a house on the same street, before shooting and killing a 59-year-old man in a nearby park. Davison then moved on to Henderson Place, where he killed again, this time a 66-year-old woman. He told a passerby there was nothing to worry about, mate. Shortly afterwards, he turned his pump-action shotgun on himself. A year on, and a community still waiting for answers. Not least why Davison's shotgun and licence were returned to him by local police just weeks before the shooting. They'd been revoked the year before after he assaulted 2 teenagers. The Independent Office for Police Conduct have awarded misconduct notices to 2 staff members and an officer involved in approving his licence.
They want their questions answered. They want to know what went wrong and what we're doing to sort of make sure it doesn't happen again.
But today's not about questions. A series of events are planned for this weekend. A memorial service for the families, another candlelit vigil for the community. Trained staff, including members of victim support, will be out in force, offering comfort for a community still reeling. It's hoped the inquest, scheduled for January, will be a chance for the community to ask its questions. Why them? Why us? And what next? Jeff Moody, GB News.
Really powerful stuff there and some big questions remaining. Well, Jeff Moody joins us now live from Heche. Thanks for joining us, Jeff. How is the community feeling ahead of today's service?
Well, the service has actually just finished. It started at 11 o'clock this morning, just concluded about half an hour ago. Then things move to here. We're going to find that here is where the memorial is later on today. There's going to be a candlelit vigil here at the Hoe a little bit later on. Talking to people on the streets, they can't quite believe it's been a year. The grief is still there, not as raw, as I said, as it was a year ago, but still very much in place. People are saying that the first anniversary is obviously the hardest. Things move on a little bit after you've got that first anniversary out of the way. And certainly after the candlelit vigil tonight, the emphasis changes slightly to the inquest, which takes place in January. That's when we really begin to get some answers to the questions. How could this possibly have happened? How could a man that was known to have all sorts of issues, that his own mother had said that he doesn't feel that he should have been allowed to have a gun, his gun was taken off him and then returned to him, as was his gun license, just days before the tragic shooting. So plenty of questions still to be answered, and it's hoped that once this memorial is out of the way, once today is out of the way, they can focus on that inquest, which gets going in January.
Absolutely, really important to keep our eyes on this one and learn the lessons. Jeff Moody, thank you. Now, finally today, Britain is not the only country experiencing a heatwave right now. Most of Europe is also experiencing extreme heat with wildfires across France and Spain. In Germany, even the rivers are drying up, including the Rhine, which runs through Germany's industrial heartlands of the Ruhr region, of course. Well, joining me to discuss what this means for the German economy is freelance German correspondent Thomas Sparrow. And Thomas, the Rhine is one of the most famous rivers in the world. It's flowed through the history of this continent. Drying up seems like a pretty seismic event.
It's not only one of the most famous rivers in Europe, it's also one of the most important rivers in Europe. I would also say internationally, it's absolutely vital for Germany's economy. There's a lot, really a lot, that goes through the river Rhine, and the fact that levels are now so low is a very big problem, not only for the ecosystem around the Rhine, but also for Germany's economy. There are fears that if this situation continues, if barges cannot travel through the river Rhine, that could have a really big impact on Germany's growth forecast for this year. Now, the big problem is what comes next. Authorities simply cannot change the situation immediately, but what they can do is try and find alternatives. And one of the alternatives that is being discussed right now is whether some of those shipments should be stopped and instead they should use rail, for example, to transport things as important as coal, for example, which is normally something that travels along the River Rhine.
And coal, I think, is probably the most important point here when we're looking at the global energy market. Of course, all countries are really struggling with less gas than before. I suppose if the coal can't get to the power stations in Germany, Germany will be using more gas from elsewhere. Potentially, this will push up the prices for everyone else as well.
Well, prices are already going up, especially for the things that are transported through the River Rhine. That's something that's already clearly visible. But coal, as you mentioned, does play a very important role in Germany's current political and economic situation, because coal was being now specifically used as an alternative to Russian gas flowing less and less towards Germany. And that's why German authorities were trying to use alternative sources, including coal. If coal, as you say, cannot be transported as easily as they hoped, then that could also bring even more economic problems to Germany. That's also why among the discussions that are being led by authorities is a possibility to make coal transport via trains a priority. In other words, to find the specific slots so that if barges cannot take the coal through the River Rhine because water levels are very low, that can be done with trains as a very much important priority here in the country.
Now, this is, of course, all in the context of the German political consensus over the last decade or so being closing down nuclear power stations. Now, I understand that the government might have made a sort of half U-turn on this now, potentially extending the life of some of these power stations, but the Greens, who are in government, are still implacably opposed to nuclear power. Is the consensus shifting now, given the really serious energy situation?
It is shifting, especially among the German population. Many people in favor of really keeping those power plants open, especially under the current difficult economic situation, energy situation. It is still, however, not completely decided whether the government will complete that U-turn. You mentioned correctly that there are divisions among Germany's governing coalition when it comes to nuclear power plants. Some, as the Greens, have been opposed to using those power plants, but other members of the German coalition think otherwise. There will be a decision coming soon. That's something that the German Chancellor stressed himself this week, after there's a stress test which can deliver some concrete results as to whether those nuclear power plants would actually have a concrete impact on Germany's overall energy situation. So the U-turn is, let's say, being made. It's being discussed, but it hasn't been completely decided.
Really interesting stuff there. Well, Thomas Sparrow, thank you for joining us. We've run to the end of the interview and indeed the end of the programme. I'm back from 9:30 on Monday morning, but next it's Mark Longhurst. Have a good weekend.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news,